Kia ora, good morning and welcome to 9 to Noon. I'm Kathryn Ryan. First this morning, we welcome the leader of the Labour Party, Jacinda Ardern, for the second of our two interviews with the leaders of the two biggest political parties. Yesterday we spoke to the National Party leader, Bill English. You can access that interview on RNZ's webpage. You can also view my interview with Ms Ardern this morning by going to the Radio NZ website, radionz.co.nz, on RNZ's Facebook page or on Freeview Channel 50. The polls are tight. As with National, most polls showed Labour would need a support partner to become the government. Some polls have showed it able to get there with either the Green Party or the New Zealand First Party. Other polls, including the latest one last night, show that either a Labour-Green coalition or indeed a Labour-New Zealand First arrangement would require a third party as well. Jacinda Ardern entered Parliament in 2008. She became the leader of the Labour Party just 2 months ago following the resignation of Andrew Little. Ms Ardern, good morning. Welcome to 9 to Noon.
Morena, thank you for having me.
We have focused this morning on some key areas in our questions, and at the end there'll also be an opportunity for you to cite whatever you wish from your record or from your party's manifesto that you might want to highlight as the case for your party's election. I'd like to begin where we began with the National Party leader yesterday. While many New Zealanders are doing well in this economy, is that not the case for a growing number of New Zealanders?
Yeah, and that's been one of the arguments we've made this election, that whilst those markers that international commentators look to around growth may be holding up well, actually for many New Zealanders not feeling the benefit of that. At an individual level, housing costs have increased. We're increasingly seeing homelessness in New Zealand to a rate that I think really doesn't sit well with our sense of who we are. Also, those who did get pay rises last year, 2/3 of them, it didn't keep pace with the cost of living. Health, increasingly inaccessible for people. Those are the markers that really matter to me as well. And so those are the markers we've been focusing on this election.
How will you change that perception that for a growing number of New Zealanders, they're not doing as well as other New Zealanders who are? Practically, what are you going to do about that?
And it's not just a perception, it's a reality. And so when it comes to things like wages, actually moving the minimum wage is a way that we can have an instant effect on that. We've said $16.50, and I think actually that the person in Gisborne from the packing shed who raised that with Bill English was right to raise it. We just haven't seen people in those lower wage jobs having an income that was keeping pace with the cost of living. So that's a practical thing, a simple thing at that level. But actually, we've got a much wider problem within New Zealand's economy. And we've had, the OECD come and tell us that if you want to lift wages in New Zealand, you've got to do something about productivity. So when we've been talking about education a lot, for us, that hasn't just been about our beliefs around free education. It's also been about lifting our performance as an economy.
Okay. The goals are very noble, and I'm sure everyone would welcome them. The details get hard. On housing, given where things are at now, the median house price in Auckland having gone through 10 times median income, the national median now over $600,000, what can you do?
Our contention has been actually when you look at the market in Auckland, and it's clear it's failed, that there is a need for some intervention. We've said that building affordable houses has to be the go-to now for a government that wants to intervene in a failing market. Now, some people have asked, what does that do to the effect of our property values if you're already a homeowner? Well, actually, part of the problem is that we don't have enough homes being built in that affordable range. The average house in Auckland that's being built is closer to 200 square metres than it is 100, and that's what we need. We believe that by building at cost, by having prefabricated housing, building at scale, making sure that you're doing centralised planning, by having the Crown involved, we can help bring down those costs.
Okay.
We on average are aiming for homes 400 to 600,000.
If it were that straightforward, everyone would be doing it. All right, let's look at some realities. The government's housing construction pipeline report shows constraints on the industry. New builds can't keep up with the necessary targets. That affects your proposed building program of affordable homes, 100,000 affordable homes. The industry simply can't do it.
Well, we certainly acknowledge that we do need more skilled individuals in building and construction. The estimates that we've got are around an extra 5,000 people.
Many would believe that's extremely conservative.
Oh, well, we had someone independently produce that for us. But it is more around, well, what plan have we got in place to try and scale up there? We acknowledge that some of that will be skilled migrant labour, in the same way that we have had in Canterbury. So we've created a separate skills category, visa category, just for Kiwi Build. But alongside that, I've spent the last 6 weeks on the campaign at places like EIT and MIT, seeing young people doing their pre-trade training. We've got people in the pipeline. We haven't got necessarily the apprenticeships for them, so we want to incentivise employers to take them on.
As we said, the Housing Construction Pipeline report says the constraints on just about every area of construction are such that it cannot meet the targets that are there now. And here's the issue. If so-called affordable houses, even if you can build them fast enough, they're only going to stay affordable if sufficient new build supply comes on over the next few years. Otherwise, they're just going to rise to the market price. So it's just not as straightforward as it seems.
Look, I absolutely acknowledge that it is a complex issue dealing with our housing crisis, no doubt. That's why it's been not just about what we do around our building program, but also what we do around demand. It's why we've talked about foreign speculators. It's why we've talked about closing tax loopholes. Our frustration has been that the government hasn't really tried on any of those measures. So look, we've produced our own plans. We do think it's a mixture of things that need to be done. And we've even gone right back to saying, it even comes back to what we're doing in our own forestry industry. Why aren't we milling in Gisborne and creating those prefabricated houses here within New Zealand to try and help get the pace of build that we need?
Because the companies who are already doing prefabrication say they cannot get the cost benefit up, they cannot get the scale up quick enough to make it worthwhile.
And yet that's not quite what I've heard for some of the visits that I've done. Look, but we've set out an ambitious program. We have, because we believe that housing is a right, and I do hold ambition that at least Kiwi Build can make a difference.
All right, so so-called affordable houses as part of the plan. Some of the measures you've said you'd move on demand side quickly include increasing the bright line test for capital gains on properties other than the family home, right, from 2 to 5 years. With house prices like we've seen, and with the underlying pressures as strong as they appear to remain, acknowledging the current levelling off, right, is that going to deter anybody from buying for capital gain?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I mean, the reason we said we'll extend it from 2 years to 5 years was because actually at the time that we debated that legislation in Parliament, that was the officials' recommendation, was that we should go to 5. So our view is, let's go to 5. But that was the entire reason I took a political risk and said I want to do that extra work.
But the CGT, 15% or 33%? Where is it going to be to stop people who are making galloping profits actually change their behaviour?
And that's the question that we need to ask.
So you can't answer whether it's 15% or 33%?
That's why we said we need those experts in that tax working group.
Land tax as well?
Nothing that's going to affect the family home. But my premise going into this was I want to know what will make the biggest difference on home ownership and lifting those home ownership rates.
Question
and
people
I want
have.
that question on fairness answered as well.
National's got 9 years to answer for its time in government. You've got 9 years to answer for your time in opposition. Why are we having a tax working group after 3 years in opposition? Why haven't you got this pegged down, as indeed in previous manifestos in opposition you have?
In part because actually the things have changed since our last manifesto. Of course, the bright line test came in. So we've now got this one mechanism that wasn't there when we first had the conversation. So the test then became, was that sufficient? Is that enough? And in part it's also because I've had 7 weeks in the leadership. I knew what I wanted to tackle as leader. What felt really important to me was that home ownership question. I wanted to do that over the next 3 years in office. But I also had to hear that people were saying to me, we accept the urgency, the case you've made for urgency, but we want certainty. So over the course of the campaign, I found a way to balance the two. And look, some people will say that was one of the risks I took, but I wear that because I think it was the right thing to do.
What would success look like in the housing market under a Labour-led government?
Lifting home ownership rates, definitely. That's a measure for me.
Looking at that private market now, 10 times median incomes in Auckland, 600,000 plus median nationwide.
Yeah.
What would success look like if your policies worked?
Well, of course, increasing the number of homes that are in the $400,000 to $600,000 bracket does bring that down, but without
you can't break a market up like that. You can't break a market up like that,
but
right?
that is where the failure is. And so for us, success is about the number of houses that are in that affordable bracket, because people keep looking to their own values, but actually you can bring in affordable housing without having that strong dent in people's values.
as a market value, right? If someone is bought at the peak for $800,000 and someone else is buying for $500,000, right? They're not going to go and buy the $800,000 house. What is going to happen if there is a shortage of supply is that your affordable houses, as soon as they're sold, are going to rise to the market value. So I ask again, what would success look like?
Yeah, but again, that's assuming that just goes onto the market and that we're running something more like the Housing Foundation.
What would that mean? Would that mean you can't sell your house within a certain time frame?
They're parameters, of course. When you've got something that's built at that level. So we've set out that we want to make sure that someone who buys an affordable Kiwi-built home, that if they sell within a certain rate, we have the right to bring that back into our stock. Of course you put parameters around it.
So then the person who's bought their house at $800,000, if your proposition works,
these are the ones that
are likely to see their comparable value decrease, right?
We are keeping that pocket of housing, in the way that the Housing Foundation run their system, is that pocket of housing always remains within an affordable bracket.
How much of the 100,000 Kiwi build is that kind of regulation going to apply to?
Oh, for the 100,000, we're all going to operate. They'll all be operated in that way. But the point here, Kathryn, is that the reason we've taken this intervention, and it is a big intervention to make, is because at the time that my parents bought their home in the 1970s, we had the highest home ownership rates really in the developed world. It is within our reach to get back to that place, but we are going to have to do things differently.
That's my point, what it takes to get back to that place. Because you've had economists, not just Don Brash, but Arthur Grimes would be another, and actually a former Green Party co-leader, also fronting up to the fact that a 40% decline is the sort of figure you're talking about, unless you are prepared to wait decades for wages to keep up. Are you prepared to accept an outright decline in house prices in order to rebalance this?
And that is not what our plan and agenda has been built around. Our view still is that the market failure has been just that there is not that quantity.
Reinvent economics.
No. I understand what you're saying, but that's where the deficit has been. Look, what I do not accept is that I've sat in front of a select committee where Nick Smith's view has been around his plans around affordable housing, is simply that you don't create any in that band. You let the market just continue to work the way it's working. People will sell up their affordable homes to take on the new ones that are being built in his affordable housing areas, which aren't technically affordable, and we just have a trickle down. That I don't accept. We actually need to accept we are not building houses in that range. It's just not happening. Part of it's our planning rules, part of it's just that no one's doing it at scale. That's the bit of the market we're intervening on.
100,000 is a proportion of the housing market, we should say, and a moderate.
It is a modest proportion.
On
I accept that.
On immigration, because you criticised the previous government for not bringing in any demand-side measures, one of which could be reducing the level of immigration until infrastructure caught up. What is your position now on immigration? Are you going to cap what have been record high numbers of immigration? Are you going to bring that figure back?
Yeah, certainly the policies that we've created will have that impact. We haven't created a target number. That's not the way we've worked.
Isn't that a cop-out?
No, because you can make an estimate, but it's impossible
What's
to
your
really
estimate?
tell. Our estimate is between 20 and 30,000.
Reduction.
Yeah.
And so that will not impact upon not only the demand for workforce labour in the construction industry, but also the primary production and aged care sectors?
No, we've continually maintained if you have a genuine skills gap, our policy will not affect you.
So who are the 20 or 30,000 who won't be coming?
It's in two parts. Predominantly, it is in our education sector. One of the things that's changed over time has been in the past, if you came in for education purposes, if you were doing bachelor degree level, then you had the ability then afterwards to try and find work. What's happened in more recent times is there's been an increase in the number of people who are accessing lower level courses. I would say some of them subpar, things that we wouldn't be proud to export, that we wouldn't be proud to have people paying for. They then by default would get an extra year to stay on and work, and it wouldn't necessarily be in a job where there was a gap. That's the area where we're seeing exploitation. The fact that the Labour Inspectorate, 30% of the cases they're dealing with are with migrant labour. There is exploitation, and I think that's where it's happening.
On Labour's fiscal plan, it includes significant upfront increases to the health, welfare and education spending over your first three budgets. Is this an absolute priority for you?
Yes.
All right. That would be welcomed by many working or needing services within those sectors. But overall, your spending plan leaves around $3 billion of uncommitted spending over the three budgets. Economists, including those who say your fiscal plan adds up, are also saying it is tight, very tight. So what gives if those budget surpluses are not as large as predicted, or if unforeseen costs We'll talk more about your industrial relations policy, pay rises, etc. Push beyond that limit. What gives?
It is tight, but that close to $3 billion over that period of time. That is also not an unusual amount to allow as part of your operating allowance. Keeping in mind that that doesn't include, because we've already budgeted to include population growth and inflation, both for health and education, and we've set aside additional capital spending for those areas too.
This is the operational budget we're talking about.
Yeah, so what we have remaining, is tight.
What gives? If the surpluses aren't like everyone was waiting for the last preview, as if it's some kind of, tablet from wherever, and we have to say at the moment we don't know what our economic forecast is going to be going forward. There's a possibility of a shock. Anytime there's a possibility of shock. So what gives? If those budget surpluses move even a little, what gives first? Is it debt repayment? Do you hold back on some of those spending promises? What gives first?
And of course, in our budget responsibility rules, we've said, if we do have a major issue, a major downturn, if we have a major natural disaster, we're not going to leave New Zealanders in the lurch.
We're talking about a shock that just simply reduces surpluses. We've had 3 years of surpluses after the best part of a decade of deficits.
And $3 billion spare is not an unusual amount to allow as an operating allowance.
What would adjust first? Would you slow debt repayment first? Would you come back on your spending? Or would you consider income tax rises?
No, I personally don't see us in that scenario. But what we have demonstrated, we demonstrated is that we are not, for instance, on the debt track. We've already said we're going to be about 2 years slower than national on our debt track, because I will not stand by while Kiwis are sleeping in their cars or while we're not preparing for super in order just to speed up those repayments. So we have said on that one that we'll be a little bit slower so we can get building on the housing program. So that gives you a sense of what we will not allow to happen.
So debt slows first,
Look, we've budgeted so we won't be in that predicament. But what I will say is I'm not going to see New Zealanders suffer because of the decision-making that we're that kind of decision-making.
There's been much discussion about tax. It's a real point of difference between Labour and National. Could we work through what will and won't be happening? What you've said you will introduce is a water royalty on bottled water and irrigators, a tourist tax and a regional petrol tax.
Correct.
You've said that no other new taxes would take effect until at least 2021, after the next election, but they may be legislated for.
Correct.
What will that tax working group be asked to consider? Which taxes?
I'm not giving them specific taxes. I'm giving them two principles. One is, what can we do to lift our home ownership rates in New Zealand? And what can we do to make our taxation system fairer? Someone who works a 40-hour week pays tax. Someone who makes all their income from flicking off homes doesn't in the same way. Those are the two principles. I haven't set parameters beyond that, but they do know that there's no point bringing back to me anything that affects the family home or the land that sits under it.
So is it a focus on the CGT and on the land tax, or does it go wider? Does it look at asset taxes? Does it look at rebalancing between income and wealth and asset taxes?
I've given them those two principles, and for them, then it's up to them what they bring back.
Who will be on that working group? You've said tax experts, academics and economists. Do you have a long list? Do you have a short list?
No, we do not.
You don't have any names yet?
No, we do not. I've had Michael Cullen
people
floated.
Who are effectively drafting your tax policy and you don't know who they are.
I want to draw from the experience that, for instance, Treasury has had working in that field. I want to take the time in government when we've got the advice of officials to make sure I've got the best people around the table possible.
This couldn't have happened over the last 9 years in opposition.
I've been in office 7 weeks. I've certainly moved as quickly as I can on this. I have added extra urgency.
You've been in Parliament for 9 years, though. So what was happening in the caucus? What was happening in the caucus that we don't have a fuller plan on tax, a fuller plan on the Climate Commission we'll talk about in a moment?
Well, we have a full plan on the Climate Commission.
We have a plan to set one up.
We've followed the Parliamentary Commissioners of the Environment's guidance around that. She's the one that recently set out that a Climate Commission should be established. We agreed with her, and that's what we'll do in office. Look, across the board, on these issues, of course, we set up our plans, our parameters and our vision. There are some nuts and bolts that are just much easier to work through when you're in government. National did exactly the same thing in 2008 with their tax working group. The big difference between National and Labour on that has been I've talked about it during a campaign and they didn't. Yes, that means that I've been asked more questions.
Yes, it means that the perception is the focus on housing was that this is the way to introduce a CGT in a first term without saying you're going to do it. And should you just have said you're going to do it and here's why?
I think people clearly see that I'm dissatisfied with where we are now. I don't call it a strategic mistake. I've done politics a bit differently. I've spoken openly about what my my plans are before I've rolled them out. I don't regret that.
On the water royalty, you've indicated 1 to 2 cents per 1,000 litres, I think. So that means farmers and irrigators, or those percentages of farmers who are irrigators, can do some maths on that.
Correct.
The target, primary target, I think you've said, was the water bottlers.
Yes.
However, will putting a price on water extraction this way open up the need to negotiate with Maori, open up a treaty claim over iwi and hapu interests in fresh water? And how will you handle that?
The advice that we've had is no. But what we have from the likes of Eddie Jury of the Māori Council with vast experience with the Waitangi Tribunal and from others. But actually the point here is that the Waitangi Tribunal has said that there are issues to work through and to resolve, and we've said we will do that. In our minds, the water royalty opens up options for us to be able to do that. I'm not going to shy away from that challenge. You know, Māori do have a stake in the water question. We all do. In our view, we all have a stake in water. Māori's stake is greater than most. So let's resolve that issue. We're yet to hear how National intends to do that.
Well, they're not going to resolve it by not putting a price on water. How are you going to resolve the reality that putting a price on water opens the possibility of claims over interests in it?
Well, it certainly doesn't. It doesn't reopen tribunal claims.
Treaty claims. There might be a fresh claim, right?
Me.
How do you envisage working through that possibility? Do you have a plan to work through
David
that possibility?
David Parker's already started those conversations with iwi leaders, and that's something that we'll continue. The royalty, of course, does mean that we'll have that conversation around the way that that's divided.
Would it be local interests as we've had in the likes of the Foreshore and Seabed Act? Would it go into a similar system? Would it be like a Sea Lords deal was done over fisheries that took a more generic and overall approach?
Not around allocation. We don't see it in that way. I think that's probably where the national government is going down an allocation path. We see it differently. But again, I want to work that through jointly with Māori. We've acknowledged the interest rather than just shying away from the conversation, but I do not accept it opens up an ownership question. We deal with our minerals royalty regime in a different way too. There is a path through for us on this together.
On industrial relations, what are your planned changes?
On industrial relations, we've certainly said that when things like removing meal and tea breaks, simple things like that National boredom we didn't agree with, that there are things that we would repeal. You know, we also have a view that there needs a bit more fairness in the system. We've always had probationary trials, for instance, but when National said with 90 days that you don't need to give a reason when you sack someone, we thought that didn't feel fair.
So that's going to go.
us.
The 90-day trial's going to go.
We're redesigning that.
What would you say is the single biggest change proposed under your industrial relations?
Probably the fair pay agreements probably will make a big difference. The Terra Nova agreement gives us an example of what the kind of effect they would have. I think
the
it's
Terra
one
Nova
way.
agreement came out of a court case, and it was an equal pay legislation court case.
I will draw you on that just a little bit. It has the same effect. It has been set an industry-wide standard.
It's going to cost $2 billion over the next few years. So
that was large scale, more than 50,000 people involved.
So what will the fair pay agreements be, and who will find themselves involved in them?
We imagine that we'd probably have possibly up to 1 to 2 of them a year. They will tend to be focused around standards for individuals who work across a number of different, across one sector. Which sectors? Because someone listening now is thinking, I'm an employer or I'm a worker. Am I going to be involved in this process? Home care workers is an example where you've got people working across one sector who tend to coalesce around the same kind of standards of wages. But I'll give you an example of the problem that we have at the moment. For instance, government's required councils to go out and re-tender for bus contracts. That means that councils now are considering tenders that are putting up offers to reduce the cost of those contracts by lowering the paying conditions for the bus drivers. That's the way that they're now bidding. They're in a bidding war. That means that the standard that those bus drivers are working to is being lowered in order for people to win those contracts.
So would you set the pay for bus drivers around the country who were in like contracts?
That's an example of how we could try and stop at least a race to the bottom, because we are a low-wage economy. We need to start thinking about that. What I will say, though, is there has been a bit of conversation around will we see industrial action as a result? No. This is not an area where there will be strike action. It will be a collaborative process.
How not? Because if these are collective contracts, that's illegal entitlement.
No, you legislate.
You legislate that people can't strike.
We've always said, the CTU have always said, this is not an area where they see industrial action being a part of it. It's a collaborative process.
So will you legislate across union members' legal right to strike in order to negotiate these
deals. The unions
deals?
have never sought the right to strike for fair pay agreements. That's not the way they work.
Let's look at it, because from the manifesto it says fair pay agreements will be agreed by businesses within an industry and the unions representing workers within that industry. They'll set basic standards for pay and employment conditions within an industry. So that's right around the country, right? According to, I should finish the sentence, according to factors including job type and experience. So that would apply right across the country.
And this is not
I'm
new.
not sure what percentage of workers are in unions anymore. Is it around 20%?
Oh, I don't have the up-to-date figures.
Is that an indicator of the likely industries that would be in play?
This is not new. I mean, this is, when we look at, for instance, why is it that New Zealand's wages are so relatively poor to Australia's wages? Well, they've managed to maintain, good wage rates through mechanisms like this. My message to employers is, well, actually, we're talking a small number that would likely to be worked through in any given year. And this is not something to be afraid of. It will be a collaborative process. It won't include industrial action. I see it very much as the kind of process we work through on home care workers. But this is about making sure people earn a decent living and that we don't race to the bottom.
Wage floor, I think Jacinda mentioned as well. Do we not have that in the form of the minimum wage?
Well, it's certainly not sector by sector, but obviously the minimum wage for some people has become more of a target than a floor.
Right. And so when we talk about wage floors, again, that will be sector specific.
Sector specific, yeah.
Okay. On education, you would introduce first year of tertiary education free and then get to 3 years by 2024 under your manifesto. Can you afford to do that?
Yes. The reason we're staging it is because we can't afford to do it in all one lot. Of course, we've got different priorities in the government. We're able to afford these things because, yes, we said no to the tax cuts. We've cancelled those. That allows us to reinvest in health and education in particular.
Yes, it's only going to go so far, though.
It's $8 billion over 4 years. It's pretty significant.
You're locking in by a third term. You are locking in 3 years tertiary education, or we should say skills training as well, right?
Yes, that's right. It is polytech,
it's vocational training. You're locking that in permanently to government's budgets forevermore.
Yep.
And I guess, again, not just when we have surpluses, but looking forward, is that affordable? Is that going to become a burden on future governments?
No, in fact, if we want to lift our productivity, if we want to prepare for the future of work and deal with the fact that we are facing automation at a huge level in New Zealand, 46% of jobs will either not exist or change dramatically over the next decade or so, we have to prepare our workforce. This is an investment in order to make sure we're prepared for that.
You have talked about being someone prepared to tackle big, gnarly generational issues. Then you backtracked and you've explained why on introducing the CGT in a first term. You also ruled out changing the age of entitlement for national super any time during your prime ministership. Was that a mistake?
No, that was me saying that it's just simply not fair to increase the age without having made any investment or any savings towards my generation's future retirement. So the fact that the Superannuation Fund hasn't had a cent put it in under national, which meant that we've lost $5.9 billion worth of contributions as a consequence of that. And that includes even if the government were borrowing in order to invest. Now that was letting my generation down. I'm not willing to leave that uncertainty.
Separate matter, isn't it?
Well,
as part of the
same,
doubling of the percentage of GDP that super is going to cost by mid-century, let alone the allied health costs of an ageing population, is it possible you might need both? And in ruling out, in time, a change to a future generation's super, a move at all above 65, have you made a mistake?
No.
What about other matters? Are you also prepared to rule out any time during your prime ministership any alteration to entitlements or asset testing?
I believe in a universal superannuation. In fact, I'm saddened that we've moved away from this belief that actually on some matters there is a benefit.
We've said maybe people will work beyond 65. The statistics showing more people are working
in other areas, 65. Like for instance for kids. We seem to balk at the idea of us saying, well, actually at the two ends of life, our earliest years and our eldest years, there are some benefits to saying actually having some universal entitlements really do work.
Okay,
so we actually, in the flip side, have gone back to having a universal support in the first year of a child's life as well. I believe in universality. I do think there are benefits to that, particularly at those two ends of the spectrum.
Do you believe, however, it is sustainably affordable?
If we continue to save, yes.
Well, that's the issue, you see, because the super fund is dependent on Labor being in government till 2040. And you can't determine what other governments do.
And it is a shame.
Unless those keep up, and they have probably been ahead of, the fund itself is actually probably ahead of where it might have been through suspended contributions. But unless they keep up, and all governments keep up, through till the deadline, they are not going to fully smooth the baby boomers' retirement. So don't you need to leave other options open?
Of course, if we're in charge, then we have the ability to make sure that those contributions continue.
Prime Minister a long time by the sound of it, eh?
Well, if we've guaranteed that as soon as we come in, 500 million goes straight in, because we don't want to delay a moment longer. That 10% gain that we could be making from that investment.
Let's look at another gnarly generational issue. Climate change. You've called it your generation's nuclear free. The target you've set is bold, a zero carbon economy by 2050. What are the policies that you will introduce in a first term that will even start the country anywhere near that trajectory?
The comprehensive emissions trading scheme is the piece of the puzzle that's been missing. But because that, of course, incentivises us to take action on things like, for instance, planting on marginal land. There's an estimate that we have 1 million hectares of land that could be planted in forestry. That dovetails nicely into our forestry policy. 20% of our emissions, of course, coming out of transport, so investing in public transport initiatives will make a difference too. But actually, even just as we've seen in the UK, if you properly set these carbon budgets, if you properly monitor your gains and your losses, then actually you see behaviours start to change. In the UK, they've done that. They've legislated their targets. They set themselves budgets. They've seen a reduction in their emissions at the same time that we've seen a considerable increase.
It's not going to be policy fiddling around the edges. It's a goal that will require likely a complete transformation of an economy. And what is the cost going to be, and what policies will you introduce under your Prime Ministership to set the country realistically on that trajectory?
Yeah, and as I've said, that investment in forestry will make a big difference.
But that's not going to get us carbon free by 2050.
It can get us a damn long way, actually. And a lot of the estimates that have done, that is a huge part of what needs to happen. And for instance, for our agricultural emissions, because that is the biggest piece of the pie for us, I see that as not something to fear, but a massive opportunity. And that's been part of my frustration with the antagonism, this idea that we have a rural-urban divide. We have, as a country, the chance to be world-leading on smart farming, to demonstrate the ability to be environmentalist farmers, to trade on our brand and lift our brand proposition internationally. That's my aspiration.
The reality check on emissions, and we should say the previous Labor government committed to, and indeed did ratify the Kyoto Protocol back in 2002. So this is not new business for Labor. The reality is that emissions, I'm quoting the Ministry for the Environment emissions tracker from 1990 to 2015, both gross and net went up.
Yes.
They've kind of levelled off, and they went up significantly.
Yes.
So you've alluded to it, 3 out of the top 4 contributors to that were farming or food production related.
Yep.
How are we seriously going to cut emissions with the way our economy is structured?
Well, at the moment, until we have a comprehensive emissions trading scheme, there's no incentive to invest in the research and development that will help us bring those emissions down. Good example, we know now that actually the feed you use can make a difference. The way that you use rotational grazing can make a difference. But until you actually create a reason to invest in that in technology and innovation, we won't see moves on it. I want us to lead the world on this. And when New Zealand does, not only will we benefit from that economically, will show other countries the kind of technology it'll take, and that will lead, I think, to us being world leading.
The flip side of the economic benefits is 3 out of 4 contributors to those years of emissions growth were farming or food production related. So you're talking about a major shift to the economy. No matter whether you're planting trees, no matter whether you're using smarter technology or newer practices.
But there's a lot to be said for mitigation. An average farm could actually mitigate any of their agricultural emissions through just 5 hectares of planting. That's actually what it will take. Now, that is entirely within our reach. And I absolutely believe that this is an opportunity for New Zealand to carve a path for ourselves that makes us, the envy of the world. And when we trade on that, that will be to our benefit.
Will you put a cap on cow numbers in sensitive catchments in this country? We know that in some catchments it is intensified. You've talked about Canterbury, 200% increase in the Selwyn district. Are you going to direct through the national policy statements or another mechanism regional councils to reduce herd numbers?
We haven't used blunt instruments like caps. We have said that a national policy statement that if there's any move towards large-scale intensification or conversion needs to go through a consent process.
Yesterday I asked the National Party leader, who's been in Parliament and government for decades, whether he was the person to lead the country in the 21st century with the challenges we've got coming down the barrel. You've never been in government. You've been a party leader for less than 2 months. Are you, right now, the person to lead the country from Sunday?
Yes. The only wish that I would have had from this campaign was more time, because I absolutely understand the need for New Zealanders to have perhaps had a little more time to get to know me better. But my message is we can't wait another 3 years for that. The challenges that we face are too acute in housing and health and education in our environment. My pledge is that I have an utter commitment to New Zealand doing things differently, facing the challenges of the next century, but actually doing it together. I have an eye for those challenges. I believe it doesn't have to be politics as usual. So for those challenges to be taken on head on, I think I'm the person for that job.
It's a big ask 7 weeks out, and I come back to your party again. And we talked about why certain things perhaps weren't. I recall the last time a Labour government came in after 3 terms, it had entire employment relations legislation drafted. It was ready to move on district health boards and to bring elected health members back in straight away, right? So my question is, why, not just you, because the country's getting to know you, but why is your caucus that would become your cabinet not in this position as well?
You've just made an assumption that we haven't got those policies ready to go. Some of them are in our 100-day plan because they are. So I would contest that. We have a team that is absolutely ready, a mixture of experience from past cabinets, but also new, fresh, regenerated ideas and team members. And actually that's a good thing. That's to our advantage. We're not willing to do politics as usual, and I think that will benefit New Zealand.
Have we highlighted the one thing I was going to let you highlight to make your case for re-election, or is there something else? For election,
Look, I would hope that probably we're at saturation with voters right now, and now it's a chance for them to make a difference with their own vote. Whatever they do, I just hope they get out and cast a vote.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks for yours.
It's the Labour leader, Jacinda Ardern.
In the back of the taxi, you turned off the TV and read me a book on your phone. Here's the return of your skeleton key, oh baby, the places we've gone. If that was goodbye, then I must be high. You know I'll be seeing you soon. If that was goodbye in the snow in
Try not to stare at the sun. That's Eleanor Friedberger. It is 10:15 on 9 to noon. Well, with the introduction of the iPhone X, Apple brought to the forefront facial recognition technology, or what they call Face ID, a way for users to be able to unlock their phone just by looking at it. The technology's been around for decades, but until now it's not started raising questions about safety and security. Just recently, a controversial Stanford University study used face recognition to determine whether someone was gay or straight. The computer algorithm correctly distinguishing between gay and straight men 81% of the time and 74% of the time for women. But critics panned the ethics of the study and the potential for this kind of technology to violate people's privacy or to be abused for anti-LGBT purposes. To explain the technology and to talk us through its real-life uses and potential risk factors is Claire Garvey, a privacy lawyer who researches the risks of face recognition technology at Georgetown University. Claire, welcome.
Thank you so much.
What are the ways in which face recognition technology can and is being used?
Face recognition technology is already very common. Law enforcement agencies, both in the United States and across the world, use face recognition both as an investigative tool to look for the identities of people in photographs, but also increasingly as a surveillance tool to monitor crowds of people in real time to try to identify those people. In addition, retail outlets are using face recognition to identify potential shoplifters or what they consider to be high-value customers. I think we're all very familiar with the way a lot of applications and social media platforms use face recognition. Facebook, in particular, that's how face recognition is the mechanism through which Facebook suggests we tag our friends. Increasingly, applications allow us to identify people through face recognition, including an application in Russia, which actually allows strangers to identify you just by taking your photo, which raises a lot of privacy concerns.
How are the strangers accessing information that enables them to recognise your face? Are the likes of some of the big companies who are to whom we're giving facial recognition information, are they shopping them?
So what we have to remember is that face recognition, this is a biometric. This is a way for a company or for a law enforcement agency or an application to recognize us or to allow somebody to recognize us at a distance and in secret. We may not know that this is taking place. So what it means is face recognition has a lot of applications in ways that we might not be aware that it exists. And
I understand, but would my details, perhaps through using Facebook or perhaps through using the new iPhone, would my details, how would they become publicly available to someone else? Would they be on the internet somehow?
Sure. So that entirely depends on the company that has chosen to collect face recognition. My understanding is that Apple is taking this very seriously. The template, the face recognition information that they're collecting is stored locally on the phone and not accessible to anybody else. Likewise, Facebook operates in a very similar manner. However, there are companies out there, such as a company who produced this app Face First in Russia, who they are taking face recognition templates and making them available to everybody. And the face recognition, the faces that they have on file are from everybody who has a VK account. This is Facebook's equivalent in Russia.
Thank you.
So it very much depends on the company.
When it comes then to official uses, shall we say, airport security, police databases, what are the laws around that use now?
The challenge is there very much are no laws around this. In the United States, there are no federal or state laws that govern the use of face recognition by a government entity, with very, very few exceptions. So what this means is we can apply certain privacy laws to face recognition, but what it has meant in practice is law enforcement agencies in particular, but also Homeland Security and State Department and other agencies have been able to roll out massive face recognition systems with no oversight and very little visibility to the general public.
What are the dangers of it over and above other forms of surveillance, essentially? And do we get to the heart now of profiling? Is it being used for profiling purposes?
As a general matter, face recognition used to identify people is just a particularly powerful form of surveillance. It can be used as a way to track somebody, not by their phone or by something that they have on them, but by something they cannot leave at home, their face. Since it's done in secret, it often means that the person is unaware that this may be taking place. There are other forms of face recognition, such as what you mentioned, this study looking at classifying people based on facial characteristics to determine whether their sexual orientation. This is very much in the academic experimental phase, and a lot of these studies have not been replicated. They have not been proven. However, companies are starting to adopt these facial characterization tools into the products that they then sell. So there's a company called Faceception out of Israel who they market a product to predict somebody's criminality based on facial characteristics. I would argue this is not accurate science, and yet it is something that is being used by at least one agency somewhere in the world. They have not said who they have a contract with. So this is a real concern where even if the science is not proven, it may still be used on civilians without our knowledge.
And the criticism of some of that predictive study we were talking about earlier, the Stanford University study, is that it could be used in countries where it is illegal to be gay. It could be used to harass or arrest people.
That's right. Saudi Arabia has a very robust biometric system. They use biometrics, I believe they use fingerprints, to screen all visa holders, people traveling to Saudi Arabia, and it's illegal to be gay there. It carries very, very stringent punishments. So it's not inconceivable to imagine a country who feels very negatively about homosexuality to use a tool like this to screen visitors to their country, to screen employees, to screen eligibility for travel.
Is this the holy grail in many ways for marketers and advertisers as well? The minute you walk into a shopping mall or drive past a fast food store, it's going to personally greet you and say, welcome inside. And is that part of the reason we are likely to see it increasingly used in data gathering, including as a way of opening our gadgets or whatever?
Yes, face recognition is incredibly appealing to advertisers. Not only can it identify people and remember past purchases, connect a face to purchases, to prior behavior, it can also do things like track eye movement or track somebody's movement through a store. This gives advertisers an incredible breadth of knowledge about the people in a store or somebody viewing one of their advertisements that they can then utilize to continue serving ads and making sales.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you very much. Privacy lawyer at Georgetown University, an expert in this facial recognition, and saying at the moment there really are no laws governing its use. Coming up after 10, we welcome John Adams, a former family court judge turned poet. Now to the UK though, Matthew Paris. Airline troubles in London as well. What are yours? Good morning.
Ryanair, Europe's biggest low-cost airline, with a bit of a reputation for treating their passengers with thrilling disregard. Ryanair have cancelled 4,000 flights, and that is going to apparently affect about 40,000 people. They've cancelled their flights, they say, because of a shortage of pilots, and that they're claiming it's all to do with changes in the roster due to Irish law. They're based in Ireland, but some people are saying that they've actually been losing a lot of pilots to Norwegian, a new low-cost airline, and they've just cut it a bit too close to the bone. All their rotors have got messed up, and 40,000 passengers are not going to fly when they thought they were.
Indeed. You've just returned from the Lib Dem conference. I'm not sure if you flew or not. What are the party's prospects there?
They're in good fettle, but they only have 8% support at the moment. They absolutely crashed after the coalition. They got too tainted, I think, by their association with a Conservative government. But they've got a new leader. I say new. He is, I think, 74, Vince Cable, but he's a rather impressive chap, and I went along and listened to his speech to the conference. And you know what small parties are like? That they're always optimistic, even when things don't look good. And he gave an intelligent, middle-of-the-road speech. And I've got to say that with the Tories seeming to veer off to the right and Labour veering off to the left, you'd think there's a bit of a gap in British politics for a middle-of-the-road party. That the polls are not showing it yet, but I just sensed at Bournemouth, which is where their conference was, that there may be some hope for them.
In the meantime, there's been another fuss stirred up by Boris Johnson's alleged new leadership bid.
Oh, Boris Johnson, he marches you up to the top of the hill and then he marches you down again. He suddenly published a 4,000-word article in the Telegraph magazine, a very right-wing Brexit newspaper, with all his thoughts on Brexit and how Theresa May mustn't slacken and how we mustn't pay them too much money and all the rest. And it sounded like a bit of a two fingers up to the Prime Minister, whose approach has been rather cautious. He then apparently told the people on the Daily Telegraph he was going to resign if Theresa May this Friday, which in Florence, she's going to make a big speech if she kind of backs down at all on hardline Brexiting. He then denied that he would resign, and he appears now to have completely deflated. But that's how it goes with Boris. One day there's a huge fuss and something big is going to happen, and he's going to say something significant, and then the next he doesn't. I must say there's a good deal of anger with him in the Conservative Party.
The Parsons Green tube attack latest, there have been more arrests, I understand.
Yes, I think there have been 5 arrests now, but of 3 we're not sure. But the 2 principal ones are someone called Yahya Farouk, who's a 21-year-old Syrian refugee who's been here for about 4 years, and a younger chap who can't be named. He's 18, also been here for 4 years, and both of them have been cared for by the same, obviously rather kind foster parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ronald Jones. In their house, apparently, scores of refugees have been cared for, and they're plainly a well-meaning couple, but it does rather look as though these two have been radicalized, though probably not at home. The severity of the whole thing is slightly diminished by the fact that investigation suggests that the bomb itself was extremely crude, basically made of peroxide, all mixed in the wrong quantities. The detonator kind of went off, and it turned into more of a firework than a bomb. 30 people ended up in hospital, but nobody very badly. It was on a tube train in Parsons Green at the rush hour. So our security was temporarily lifted from severe to critical, and a couple of days ago it's been put back down to severe again.
Thank you, Matthew. Matthew Paris in the UK. It is nearly 10 o'clock on 9 to noon. I'll let you know what's coming up on the rest of the show, shall I? After 11 this morning, Sarah Putter's in with her take on how the political parties stack up tech-wise going into election time. The new Apple Watch and why she thinks it's interesting. About 20 past 11, we'll welcome back educator and founder of X Factor Education, Nathan Makairi-Wallace. Today we're discussing the big issue of how best to teach children to think versus teaching them to pass an assessment or test. Also, does our curriculum teach young people skills they can meaningfully apply to the real world? Sarah McMullen's here also before midday with what she's been viewing. This includes the new movie Mother, starring Jennifer Lawrence and Javier Bardem, the Stephen King film adaptation It, and Clowns in General, plus the Block NZ. Later in the next hour, the Book 4 review, Graham Lay has been reading, it's Graham Lay's Fletcher of the Bounty, and Lisa Finucane will be in to review it for us. Before we have the penultimate episode of the radio adaptation of The Changeover by Margaret Mahi. Miranda Harcourt will be back in about 11:15 to read that for us. Straight after RNZ's news, however, John Adams for 20 years was a family court judge. He's retired from the bench, but is an accomplished poet and is in to discuss his new collection. It's called Rumpelstiltskin Blues. When John's not writing creatively, he's working on a PhD in English literature at Auckland University, working as an arbitrator and mediator, teaching lawyers and judges, and writing lyrics for his band. Of course it's named Don't Judge Me. You're listening to 9 to Noon on RNZ National.
RNZ News at 10 o'clock. Good morning, I'm Cynthia Morahan. The Labour leader Jacinda Ardern says her government would retain the right to buy back affordable houses built in a KiwiBuild scheme. Labour wants to build 100,000 affordable homes over 10 years, and 50% of them would be in Auckland. It says standalone houses in the city would cost between $500,000 and $600,000, while apartments and townhouses would be less than $500,000. Jacinda Ardern told 9 to Noon